Hi, I'm Selena Patton, Chief of Student Services for the Charter Institute at Erskine. Welcome to Part 2 of the Institute's Educate and Elevate series, Developing Meaningful Functional Behavior Assessments and Behavior Intervention Plans. The objective of today's session is to provide you with the content knowledge you will need to be able to build strong FBAs and BIPs for your students. We will focus specifically on giving you the tools you will need to be able to collect the data that will help you better define and understand the complexities of the behaviors of your students. Having this information will allow you as the current or future special education coordinators of your schools to be able to lead your school teams in addressing the behaviors that are impeding the learning of your students. The importance of building successful FBAs and BIPs leads to a decrease in discipline referrals and ultimately will lead to increases in outcomes for students with disabilities. Again, we welcome you and hope you enjoy Part 2 of our Educate and Elevate series, Developing Meaningful FBAs and BIPs.
Hi, I'm Laura Merrick, the Institute's Director of Special Education, and today I'm excited to talk with you about developing meaningful functional behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans. We plan on bringing you many useful tips and tools that you can use. So let's get started. Have you ever had a student who seems to defy everything you think you know about behavior? You could have tried all your best classroom management tricks, but the student continues to act out and disrupt the learning environment, and nothing seems to work. I'm sure you can visualize one or more students that you have encountered in the past. When traditional behavior management tools are not working, it's probably time to develop a meaningful functional behavior assessment that will drive your behavior intervention plan for that student. Once you're able to solely target the behavior and determine the function of the behavior, then you can address it with the appropriate tools and strategies. This iceberg nicely depicts how the meaning of challenging behavior is usually hidden, so it takes some uncovering to learn more about the behavior. Before we dive in, let's review some behavior basics. All children and adults engage in behavior for a reason. It is always communicating something, and it has meaning. Sometimes it can be very easy to figure out what a behavior is communicating, such as when a student waves their hand in the air back and forth when they're leaving at the end of the day. They are communicating goodbye. However, sometimes when a student incessantly speaks out in class or hits other students, it can be more difficult or even confusing at times to identify the reason. Luckily, since behavior is learned, it's also teachable. Breaking it down in the simplest terms, behavior typically is motivated by two reasons: to avoid something or to gain something. The key to developing a meaningful behavior intervention plan is based in determining why the behavior is occurring and what the function of the behavior is. Since this process can be seen as daunting and confusing to many, and actually trainings could last a full day or two on developing FBAs and BIPs, we are going to tackle this in a step-by-step process so you can have a blueprint of how to develop a functional behavior assessment. Step 1, define the problem. Step 2, collect data. Step 3, analyze the data. Step 4, determine the function of the behavior and the replacement behavior. And Step 5, develop the behavior intervention plan based on the function of the behavior. Step 3 and 4 can be combined, but we will discuss that more later. After discussing each step, we will pause and practice, and then take a look at what this looks like in Enrich. It's time for a quick tip. Multiple individuals should be involved in the functional behavior assessment process. Some of the possible participants can be the parent, student, teachers, school psychologists, administrator, counselor, behavior interventionists, and other outside agencies that may be providing services to the student. Based on the needs of the student, the team members can vary. It's helpful for one person to take the lead in organizing all components that will be needed. In charter schools, this person can be the SPED coordinator. Step 1, define the behavior. So, how are you going to go about determining the reason the behavior is occurring? First, you must define the target behavior. The behavior must be observable and measurable. You must be able to see it and count it. Oftentimes, when asking teachers to describe the behavior, it may not be described in observable terms, such as the first example, Rick loses control. It can be helpful to ask the teacher to describe what the behavior looks like in order to begin to create a behavior that can be actually defined, which could lead to a better example, such as Rick cries and tantrums. Further asking the teacher a question, such as, "What does the tantrum look like?" can then lead to the best example of Rick cries, flops on the floor, kicks feet, pounds fist on floor, and/or grabs at objects. Take a look at the next two examples and see the differences in the descriptions of the behavior. A stranger should be able to read the behavior statement and know exactly what they are looking for. Let's take a break and practice defining behavior. Let's take a look at the FBA form in Enrich to see where the behavior statement goes. It is entered into the first box that introduces the student's behavior. In addition to adding background information as to why the FBA is being initiated at this time, you would also clearly define the student's behavior. In this example, discipline information is included as well as the time of day that the behavior is occurring. It's time for a quick tip. Sticking to describing the behavior in observable terms will help you avoid one of the most common problems with defining behaviors: subjective evaluations that list inferred characteristics, such as sad, happy, upset, mad, or covert behaviors, such as thinking or remembering. These terms are not measurable and can be interpreted differently by different observers. Step 2, collecting data. Once the behavior is defined in measurable and observable terms, it's time to collect data on the behavior. We will spend some time discussing different ways to collect data, as this is the core of developing a meaningful functional behavior assessment. There are two methods to use: direct and indirect. Indirect methods include reviewing records and past psychological reports. Pulling all past discipline reports and referrals is also very valuable information, as it assists in determining patterns of behavior. Checklists, questionnaires, and interviews are other forms of indirect data collection. It's important to collect data from a variety of sources, as you would never want to use a single piece of data to develop a FBA. An example of a rating scale that can be used is the functional assessment screening tool known as the FAST. This is a quick rating scale that either a teacher and/or a parent can complete on a student by simply answering yes or no questions. The scoring on the form will then place the respondents' answers into different function categories, and the one with the largest number will assist with determining the primary function of the student's behavior. You will find this form in the chat box and within the live binder. Another form of data collection is interviews. In the chat box and live binder, you'll find 3 different interviews you can use: parent, teacher, and student. These interviews all focus on the who, what, when, and where of the behavior from different points of view. Sometimes the team forgets to ask the person at the center of this process about their own behavior, the student. Simply interviewing the student can lend some very valuable information and may immediately assist in pinpointing the root of the behavior. I've always been rather impressed with some student answers that I've received. Many students, even young students, can be very honest in answering the questions and telling why they are behaving a certain way. When the behavior is only occurring in a certain setting, such as the student is acting out in math class but not reading class, an interview with both the math and the reading teacher can give you important data about the classroom structure and perception of the behavior. And a parent interview can give you information about the home setting and possible changes in the home environment that have occurred. Direct methods of behavior collection include observations. Observations can take various forms, and simply doing a search on Google for frequency charts or interval charts will give you many resources and templates. For the sake of time today, I would like to just discuss in more depth ABC charts. In your materials is an example of an ABC chart. A stands for antecedent, which is what occurs before the target behavior. B stands for behavior, and C stands for consequence, which is what happens right after the behavior. The purpose of the ABC observation is to confirm the accuracy of indirect methods, such as the teacher interview form, identify antecedents and outcomes that the teacher may have overlooked, verify the function of the behavior, and develop the most accurate hypothesis and behavior intervention plan. When observing a student, it's important to record the events of what happened prior to and right after the behavior, as it will most likely lead you directly to the function of the behavior. This chart takes the simple events that happen and make the observer define the antecedent and the consequence in terms of function. I really like this chart because it makes you begin to analyze the behavior, which is the next step in this process. Now let's practice. We are going to complete the ABC chart using this short example. In the beginning of math class at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the teacher is passing out work folders and places the folder on the desk in front of James. James looks at the folder and then sweeps his hand across the desk, knocking his folder and his pencil onto the floor. The classroom aide comes over to James and then places him in the timeout area inside the classroom. Let's pause and fill out an ABC chart. There are a few more elements that need to be considered when collecting data. First, make sure to consider the environment. Is the student only demonstrating the behavior in a certain subject area with a certain teacher? Is the behavior only occurring during unstructured times? Asking these questions can assist with determining changes that may need to occur in the student's environment. Second, if the behavior is only occurring during a certain subject area, say the student demonstrates disruptive behavior during math class but not any other class, then it may indicate that the student is struggling with math and needs intervention in this area. Of course, looking more in depth at the student's skills and data you have from this class will help you make this determination. Also, be sure to consider other factors such as history of trauma, which can be an indicator of behavior issues, as well as diet, sleep, and any medication that the student may be taking or changes in medication. Once you collect the data, both direct and indirect data, then this would be entered into Enrich under the section of data collection within the FBA. You can synthesize all this information and any strategies previously tried. It's time for a quick tip. If a student engages in more than one behavior, the team may need to consider the intensity of each. For example, consider a student who engages in two behaviors, daydreaming and swearing, to avoid certain tasks. Though the daydreaming behavior may be more frequent, the swearing may create more of a disruptive environment, leading the team to address it first. After you have collected your data, it's time to analyze the data. This step and step 4, determining the function of the behavior, can be done in coordination with each other, since as you analyze the data, you will begin to make connections with the function of the behavior. As we have previously discussed, the team needs to collect multiple sources of data. There are various tools that you can find online that assist you in synthesizing all the information you've collected. The Behavior Pathways chart is one such tool, and you can find this chart in the chat box and in your live binder. Let's look at an example of this chart completed with information to assist you in understanding how to complete the chart. Michael is refusing to do his work in Miss Williams' math class. This usually occurs during independent seat work. He sometimes will curse and get out of his seat. Miss Williams will then send him out of the room since he becomes a distraction to other students. First, define the problem behavior in the middle box, which is refusal to complete work. Next, enter the antecedent, which is asked to complete independent seat work, which is a demand and could also be a difficult task if we knew more about this particular situation. Then enter the consequence, which is to avoid work. The setting is Miss Williams' math class. Now think of what you would want him to do in math class and enter this into the desired behavior. I would want him to complete his work without complaining and bothering other students, and the consequence of this would be to earn points on his behavior chart, good grades, and be able to advance to the next assignment. Finally, the alternative or replacement behavior is entered. This is an acceptable alternative. In this case, it would be to ask for a break, and this would be acceptable. Another note to add about this example is to take a look at the curriculum. I would guess that the work may be too hard for him and he may need some additional math intervention. Once you've analyzed the data and completed the behavior pathways chart, you should easily be able to enter the information into Enrich under the part of the form called Findings. You can see the example in this slide. Step 4 is determining the function of the behavior. As mentioned, you have probably already determined the function of the behavior or made your hypothesis regarding the function of the behavior. Remember how we discussed at the beginning that most behavior is to escape or gain something? In this matrix, you can see that the student may be gaining something in the form of attention, tangibles, activities, or something sensory related. Conversely, they may be escaping the same things. Using a matrix like this can help simplify the relationship and allow you to pinpoint the function based on the data that you have collected. Let's practice making these functional connections with an example that pulls from an ABC relationship. On the playground, when Melissa sees a peer playing with a toy that she likes, say a basketball, she hits the peer to gain access to the basketball. In this slide, you can see how to complete the FBA form in Enrich using the same example that we have been using throughout the past reviews of Enrich forms. In the hypothesis, include a statement that uses the setting, antecedent, target behavior, and function. For context information, include what is expected and how all students are reinforced. And in the replacement box, include what it is you want the student to do instead of the problematic behavior. When a classroom teacher is confronted by an annoying behavior, he or she may unknowingly positively reinforce the child's behavior by giving in to the demand. For example, in order to keep him quiet and stop the behavior, a teacher calls on the student who bounces up and down in his seat yelling, "I know, I know." However, because he got the attention that he wanted, she is inadvertently reinforcing the behavior and increasing the probability that the student will engage in this same behavior in the future. Let's hear from one of our SPED coordinators about the importance of developing a meaningful FBA and BIP.
My name is Gus Roof, and I'm the school psychologist here at Low Country Leadership Charter School. One of the main tools that I use or instrument for completing a functional behavior assessment is a structured observation system that uses momentary time sampling and event recordings to record targeted behavior. You know, if you do an FBA, it could look very different depending on the type of kid. So an FBA for a kid who is full-blown autism with maybe some cognitive impairments may be different from a kid who's emotionally disabled with average or above average intelligence. So those would be different. And the other thing I've learned over time too is like an FBA and a BIP combined, a lot of it's hypothesis testing. You're going to have to review it to see if your hypothesis was correct on what the function was. It might appear that the function of the behavior was one thing in your eyes, but when you start to deliver the intervention to it, it might not be the function at all. So you would have to have multiple meetings to work through all of that.
In the final step, you will pull together the FBA and write the behavior intervention plan based on the information that you have included in the FBA, plus include strategies and interventions that will be used. Refer to the function-based strategies in your live binder. This is a helpful handout that can be used to directly link the strategy to the function of the behavior. It is broken up into age group, elementary, middle, and high school. Once you identify the function, this table should provide a quick, direct link to the strategy to include in your behavior plan. Additionally, another function-based table from the Cedar Center has also been included. Please remember that you must be consistent with any strategy that is chosen. Also, there's no quick fixes. Just as with academic strategies and interventions, it takes time and consistency. If there are multiple behaviors, it can be overwhelming, so just prioritize behavior that you target, and again, remember there is no magic wand to fix the behavior. In this final example in Enrich, you can see how to use the strategies in the behavior intervention plan. Helen will be taught how to interact, she will be given specific praise, Additionally, social stories will be used and she will be given a warning when too close to peers, as well as there will be increased adult proximity during unstructured times. If the student behavior is severe and causing harm to self or others, please make sure to also include a crisis plan in the behavior intervention plan that gives a step-by-step process of what to do in case of a crisis. Now let's take a look at what IDEA says about FBAs and BIPs.
Thanks, Laura. What does IDEA say about FBAs and BIPs? The IDEA laws and regulations surrounding the discipline for students with disabilities can seem daunting and overwhelming. Schools are expected to use functional behavioral assessment proactively and to intervene early to prevent serious problem behaviors. Schools are required to conduct functional behavior assessment of problem behaviors under certain circumstances. Framed by IDEA are several contextual factors which, taken together, alert the need to conduct a functional behavior assessment. The IDEA states that a behavior intervention plan based on a functional behavioral assessment must be considered when developing the IEP when a student's behavior interferes with his or her learning or the learning of classmates. When the behavior interferes with learning, when developing the IEP team must, in the case of a child whose behavior impedes the child's learning or that of others, consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies to address that behavior. If the LEA, the parent, and relevant members of the IEP team make the determination that the conduct was a manifestation of the child's disability, the IEP team must do one of two things: conduct a functional behavior assessment, a FBA, unless the LEA has conducted a FBA before the behavior that resulted in the change of placement occurred, and implement a behavior intervention plan for the child. Or, if a BIP has already been developed, review the behavioral intervention plan and modify it as necessary to address the behavior. So, under what circumstances must the IEP team develop a FBA and BIP? FBAs and BIPs are required when the LEA, the parent, and relevant members of the child's IEP team determine that a student's conduct was a manifestation of his or her disability. If a child's misconduct has been found to have a direct and substantial relationship to his or her disability, the IEP team will need to conduct a FBA of the child unless one has already been conducted. Similarly, the IEP team must develop a BIP unless one already exists. If a BIP already exists, then the IEP team will need to review the plan and modify it as necessary to address the behavior. For a child with a disability whose behavior impedes his or her learning or that of others, and for whom the IEP team has decided that a BIP is appropriate, or for a child with a disability whose violation of the Code of Student Conduct is a manifestation of the child's disability, the IEP team must include a BIP in the child's IEP to address the behavioral needs of the child. Once the FBA and BIP have been completed and developed, don't forget to include a statement of functional present levels related to the student's behavior in the PLAF. Remember, the regulations require that a statement of the student's present levels of functional performance as well as academic achievement be included in the IEP. For students with behavioral difficulties, specificity with regard to present levels of functional performance is a necessary starting point in developing an IEP and measurable behavioral goals and objectives. Finally, here is a list where you can go in the IDEA for more detailed information regarding specific language that is used in the law in regards to behavior discipline for students with disabilities. Thank you for watching. I'm Kathy Griffin, and on behalf of my colleagues Laura Merrick and Selena Patton, we hope you will join us next time on Educate and Elevate.